Ted, Ashley, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us.
Full transparency, we started this interview 30 minutes ago and my laptop died. It's never happened before. So Ted and Ashley are so generous and so kind. Thank you for being so understanding. So we're starting this over. So I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Sure. I love this question. I can start with my story of when I was a kid. I actually held a long dream of being a pediatrician. And so I wanted to work with kids, and I knew I wanted to be in some sort of helping profession. I guess I didn't know too many options of different jobs, but I knew being a doctor could be one of the ways that I could do that role. But over time, as I got older in high school and then into college, I learned more about psychology. I still remember my first intro to psychology class in high school and how the research and the neuroscience and the understandings of behavior just blew my mind, and I was sold. And so it was really interesting to go to college and learn more about how to apply this work in the mental health space, more specifically, rather than medical school, which was not as much of interest. So it's pretty related what I do now. I entered a clinical psychology Ph.D. program. I'm very close to finishing, and I'll be a full-time clinician with children and youth who primarily present with anxiety disorders, mood disorders, but across different mental health challenges. And so I've been loving being able to kind of disseminate this work and story about how applicable social connection is to so many of these challenges that we're facing regarding mental health, loneliness, and how it can just serve us to increase our kind of well-being and meaning in life.
It's beautiful. And it's so needed, especially now with the pandemic and the feelings of loneliness and the loss of feeling connected to others. So important. What about you, Ted?
Well, for me, I also wanted to be a doctor when I was young. My father's a doctor, he's a dermatologist, and his parents were both doctors. So it was kind of an obvious choice in a way. But for a time, I was really interested in being a writer. Like when I was sort of in middle school, early high school, I was reading some novels and I thought it would be really cool to be a fiction writer and reading about the lives of some of these writers. And then as I got into high school, I got really into music. I played the clarinet, and I was going to a Saturday all-day program at Juilliard Pre-College and just really loved it. And so for a time, I thought I wanted to be a musician. But the way life took me, I ended up becoming a doctor. But I think all those interests are sort of wrapped into what I'm doing now. Of course, we wrote the book that we're going to be talking about today. So that writing ambition has come to fruition. It's not fiction, but it's been such a pleasure to write this book with Ashley. And as for music, I still really love music. It's still something that I need pretty much every day to some extent. And the theme that we write about in the book, this idea of attunement and connection, I feel like a lot of that for me comes from these experiences in music. So playing in a group with other people, you have to be so tuned in to what they're doing, what you're doing, how it interrelates. And there's a kind of emotional resonance that can happen between you while playing together, or even while just listening to music.
So tell us what prompted you to write this book.
So we take turns telling the story. So maybe I'll go.
I saw Ted giving you the look like, okay.
I couldn't remember which turn it was.
We're pretty good. We're pretty attuned over video now. We can suss out our nonverbals.
What's throwing you off that you have to say it again in the same interview? So you're like, wait, does that count as...
So Ted and I started working together back in, I guess, 2013. I was an undergraduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, where Ted, who is a professor and psychiatrist, has a social neuroscience laboratory. So he's doing research on social functioning. And so I was working with him in undergrad. And then after I graduated, I ended up being his clinical research coordinator for a National Institute of Mental Health funded research grant that he had received. And so that research project was about 3 years. And the focus of it was to develop these supports for autistic adults to increase their ability to connect and to just kind of enhance their general social functioning and well-being and their ability to develop relationships and maintain relationships over time. And so we were focusing on that work and that research, but over the course of the program, we sort of identified that a lot of the strategies and exercises that we were delivering to our research participants participants were things that we were using ourselves to sort of enhance our own connections and to strengthen what we call attunement in the book, this sort of elevated form of connection where, it goes beyond just your ability to know what to say in different situations or how to respond or how much eye contact to make in different conversations. Beyond those individual skills, there's this level of connection that you generate where you're able to be in tune or in sync with someone. And I think that's what we were realizing we were really trying to deliver with our participants. And, it's something that I think beyond autism, I think for everyone, they struggle with it to some degree. And there's opportunity for people to improve that skill and the different skills that make up attunement. And so at that point, we sort of thought about, wouldn't it be cool to be able to share this message with the general population in a way where we could combine the research that we know and we're working on with storytelling and all the experiences and interests that we've had personally to share this message.
Yes, and I love that you're giving us a term for kind of this concept. It's like a tool almost that we can use when we're trying to be present, when we're trying to strengthen relationships. It's like now I can think about the skills when I coach. Okay, it's really attunement. And how can I fine tune that? How can I make that better, right? And therefore strengthen my relationship with my clients and strengthen my relationship with my personal relationship with friends, with my husband. Do you mind sharing how that can show up in everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many situations, like you mentioned, in your personal life, with your spouse or partner, with family, and work relationships. What we argue in the book is that this idea of attunement is really the essence of connection. And without it, you get to a state where essentially, like the title of our book, where you're missing each other, where you're talking past each other. You may be talking at each other, but not really connecting. And it can be frustrating. It can make people feel lonely, even in the presence of other people, when there's just that disconnect and you feel like no one's getting it, no one's hearing me. And there is a lot of loneliness in our society. Like the rates of loneliness seem to be going up. And so we just thought it's such an essential basic skill, and that no matter where you are, your level of ability to connect with others, it's possible to continue to improve that. And it can have a really big positive impact on so many areas of your life.
Yeah, I remember hearing once in coach training where the trainer said, even if you were just a lamppost, not saying anything back, but just listening, the client would get something out of it, because we walk around in life not being really listened to at a deep level, right? We have conversations, but we're kind of distracted. We're not really paying attention deeply to all of the verbal and nonverbal and the energy of the person. So that when clients come to coaching, or I imagine same you see Ashley in therapy, is that people want to feel heard and seen and connect that way.
Absolutely.
It's so important.
Such a beautiful metaphor. I just got chills with that metaphor, because that's exactly what that feeling is when you're in that moment with someone and able to have such a pure, focused connection with someone. I mean, Ted and I have talked about that with different clients and patients that we've had, where someone comes in with something that they feel like they've been dealing with alone for so long, or feeling so isolated, or feeling like they're the only one in the world with this issue, or feeling like they're so weird or strange or stigmatized for it. And to just hear it, to allow them to speak their story, has so much power beyond anything you could probably say to them.
Like there's healing there.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple experiences myself in my life when someone was just really present and really open and really listening. And I could say something about myself or how I'm feeling or an experience I had. And it's so powerful. It seems so simple, but it's
not.
It's rare. Yeah.
Well, I had an experience this week where I applied to a coaching organization and I was turned down for the opportunity. And I thought, I met all the requirements. I have a master's, I'm certified, I have experience. I was really in my head about it. And I reached out to a friend who's part of this organization, and I just sent her the screenshot of the rejection. It was almost a shame to tell her, because I thought, I just got rejected and all the things, right? And I sent her the message in my effort to connect with her and just kind of be vulnerable. And she sent back, oh my gosh, they would be so lucky to have you. I actually applied 3 times. I got rejected 3 times before I got accepted. And I thought, oh, that's wonderful to know, because I was really in my head about what that meant about me. And so in connecting, I was able to be vulnerable with her. That connection helped the feelings of not being worthy or whatever, what I was feeling. It kind of went away because I thought, oh, and she's like, apply in a month and then try again if, like it'll be okay, and don't get discouraged. And that moment of connection was so powerful because I think an older version of me would have just kind of thought all those thoughts and then just never texted Ashley, never told her, she's also Ashley, never texted Ashley like, hey, this is what's going on. And so it was a good learning moment for me too, about the power of connection.
That is such an incredible example. And I think something that people need to hear. I, again, had a similar experience with that in my program. So my last year of my PhD program that I'm in for clinical psychology, we have to apply to a 1-year sort of residency internship. And it's a matching system. And I did not match my first round. And I had to go through round 2, which is just like a whole nother round of interviews and applications. And I think the way you described it is just so spot on. You feel this immediate sense of shame or embarrassment. Yeah. And just negativity and isolation in a way that then leads you to feel less motivated to connect.
Yes.
You don't want to share that experience. You don't want other people to know that you failed when they succeeded. And the saddest part is that when that happens and you get into that cave alone, you remain there alone, and it probably just only gets exacerbated, the pain. And so in that moment, I was able to do similarly what you did, reach out to people that I knew who could maybe help or could support no matter how embarrassed I was. And I had the same response. All of these psychologists who are brilliant doctors were like, yeah, I didn't match phase 1 too. And I was like, well, first of all, we got to talk about this more because that is a lot of stigma in this process. But it was
relief.
It gave me the energy and the strength I needed to get through that hurdle. And it was just a hurdle. And this application for you is just a hurdle. And it sounds like you'll be able to try again. And that's a huge theme in our book of just trying again or beginning again. Because whether it's an accomplishment like this or an obstacle at work or feeling like you're disconnected from someone that you used to have a strong connection with, just the idea that you can begin again and you can try again is essential and hopefully brings a lot of hope to people.
Yeah. And I loved how you described, and you said cave. I'm a very visual person. You said that cave that we go into. And I know I've noticed it in personal relationships too, where someone is feeling disconnected and it's hard to kind of get out of that cave. So what would you say to that person? Ted, what would you say to the person who's in that cave now and feeling so disconnected?
Well, I think you and Ashley just gave brilliant examples of what to do. And it takes courage to reach out, to be vulnerable, especially in situations like that. And I can really relate to what you guys are talking about too, because in my line of work, I get rejections all the time. I'm always putting in grant applications and, and there's so many rejections. I remember someone once said to me, a faculty member in another institution, I actually think it was in Texas, who was a little further along in her career than I am. And she's like, my career, it might look like a straight line from the outside, but there have been so many bumps along the way. There have been so many rejections. And like you guys, I really find that I have this initial desire to go in the cave and stay in the cave and not tell anyone and feel ashamed and feel giving up or something. But when I do share it, hearing that other people just take it in stride and all the rejections that they've had and so on. And I actually remember Ashley talking to me when she went through this whole ordeal as well. And I was saying, I hope it was helpful, like how many rejections I've experienced in my life and that it's par for the course. But I think that having that courage to try to do what's counterintuitive and not stay in the cave, but try to reach out and be vulnerable and share how you're feeling. And, you can start with people who you really trust, as difficult as it is. But like you guys both described so well, I think that it can dispel the loneliness and it can really be a huge relief and source of support.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Ted, because I think someone who might look at you and Ashley's resume say, oh my God, they're super successful. They're so smart. They've had a lot of success. They just wrote a book. They probably don't experience rejection or failure like I do. And it's so generous of both of you to share that that is something that you experience. And obviously, I know that everyone's going to experience it, but I think sometimes we see other people and their success and we kind of lie to ourselves and think they surely are not experiencing the feelings that I'm feeling.
And it's not obvious, I feel like, often, because we're portraying a certain image through our resumes or through our social media or whatever it would be to kind of put our best foot forward. And so there's not a lot of opportunity to see that other side, to see vulnerability in people. And so I think, I mean, I know both of us feel really passionately about speaking on that so that it sort of generates this wave. I think kind of what you described, right? You had this beautiful interaction and experience, and I think it'll motivate you to do that further with someone else. It might motivate your friend Ashley to preemptively share that experience with other people that she knows is applying. I think when we're able to break that stigma down a bit more ahead of time, you don't even realize how many people you might be helping.
And part of what I do is in my job is mentoring and teaching and mentoring. And I mean, I went through this with Ashley when she was working with me and other students that, the first time you submit a paper, like an academic paper to a journal, either it's going to be rejected or best case scenario, you're going to get this long list of criticism that are not put in a very nice way. And so I feel like part of my job as a mentor is I remember the first paper that Ashley and I submitted actually did great. It ended up being accepted, but we got pages of criticisms. And I quickly messaged Ashley and I said, this is great. Like this may sound bad, but this is like such a good outcome because it's never going to get better than this in terms of this particular context. So I try to let students know, like, don't feel bad about this. Don't feel overly criticized because we all go through this.
In the book, you share some exercises that I think would be really helpful for listeners. Do you mind sharing some of that and what can people do to kind of have more attunement in their relationships and their lives?
Sure, absolutely. So we have a bunch of different exercises that we sort of developed in a very concrete way to help people feel like they're accessible, that they can easily practice them, and not just alone, that they can build on them to using them in their daily life. So in their interactions, in their conversations, maybe even just on your walk to and from places as a way to sort of center yourself. And so one of the exercises that's one of the earlier ones that we say is ideal to start with is something to help cultivate the first pillar of attunement. So we break it down into 4 different components. We consider attunement to be built on relaxed awareness, listening skills, understanding skills, and then the ability to feel mutually responsive with someone that you are interacting with or the group that you're interacting with. And so for relaxed awareness, that's something that involves your ability to stay focused and present in a moment, sort of calm and relaxed, allowing the tension to be released from your system, and yet also really focused and in tune with what's happening within yourself as well as the other person. So one of the best ways to start to cultivate that, because I think it can be really challenging when you're maybe in a stressful conversation or you're having a meeting with a supervisor or you are sharing some really difficult information. You might have a lot of emotions bubbling up. You might have a lot of trouble focusing. And so what we say to develop relaxed awareness is to really come back into yourself physically, just starting with the physical to focus on how you're feeling in that moment. And so one of the exercises we talk about is a sitting meditation where you can remind yourself to put your feet flat on the floor, to sit forward a little bit so your back is not sitting against the table or sitting against the chair. And what you can do is sort of tilt your chin forward and lower your shoulders. And so you'll feel a really gentle stretch go down your neck and down your spine. And after you're able to feel that sensation, focusing on your breath, breathing in through your nose and then breathing out through your mouth, and really just focusing your attention on your breath for a few breaths. One of the things to remember is that sometimes it's easier to practice this at a neutral time when you're not stressed, when you're able to focus on it so that you can strengthen it like a muscle, something that you can call on like muscle memory for when you do need it in stressful conversations. But generally, even though it sounds counterintuitive to focus on yourself when you're trying to stay really present and in tune with someone else, it ultimately makes you much more effective because you're able to take note of the fact that maybe your shoulders are incredibly tense, or maybe your heart is racing, maybe you're not focusing on anything they're saying. And so bringing yourself back to that anchor of your breath and that relaxation of your body gives you a chance to come back in to the moment and to reconnect with whatever is happening in front of you.
I love that. And I was actively practicing that as you described it. And I've been actively practicing as we hit re-record, this moment of stress of, oh my gosh, my computer just went out. I need to come back, have relaxed awareness again, and come back to that point of really being present and not in my head about, oh my gosh, what do they think? What happened? What's going on? Like all the things. In your book, you mentioned kind of the example of a zebra. Do you mind sharing that? Because a zebra running from a lion, I believe, is what you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this book by Robert Sapolsky, I think, Zebras Don't Get Ulcers or something like that. It's basically this idea that our bodies are set up in a certain way to respond to stress. We have something called an autonomic nervous system that deals with the automatic functions of our body. And there's two parts of that. One is the part that is sort of the fight, flight, or freeze response where something really stressful happens. That's called the sympathetic nervous system. And the other part is like the rest, relaxation, and more of like the bonding and connecting side, which is called the parasympathetic nervous system. And the thing with the zebra is that the way not only our nervous system, but also other mammals like zebras are kind of set up to respond to an acute stress, like seeing a lion and running away. But once they've escaped from the lion, the nervous system is set up to kind of then relax. Like the danger's past, now I can relax. Now I can go into rest, recuperate, have a meal, be with my friend zebras. But the problem with like modern life for humans in the 21st century is that often we feel like we're under kind of like a chronic stress. Like, so it's not like the lion appears and then it's gone and then we can relax. It's more like my to-do list is never ending. My email inbox is overflowing. I've got to take the kids here. I've got to do this. I'm under pressure. And so living in that sort of chronic stress state, we can be tilted more towards that fight, flight, freeze, sympathetic nervous system side. And we can have not enough of that parasympathetic relaxation side. And it's that parasympathetic relaxation side that's so important for social bonding. Because if you're in this constantly hyper-stressed state, it's just really hard to connect with yourself and to connect with other people. So, some of the exercises that Ashley was mentioning, like the sitting meditation and so on, those activate the parasympathetic, the relaxation response. And if you practice them regularly, like Ashley said, and develop that sort of muscle memory for those, then the idea is that when you are out in the world, when you're at work, when you're interacting, when you're having a stressful conversation with a coworker or a boss, you're so practiced at those things that you can just call upon them. You can just bring them up and you can regulate yourself and you can develop a greater balance between that stress and sort of relaxation side. And in that way, you can stay connected with them even during a stressful conversation. And that ability to stay connected, we think, is going to increase your effectiveness. Like if you're so stressed that you're losing sight of yourself and you're not really hearing the other person, then your ability to be effective in those situations is going to be compromised. Not to mention, it just doesn't feel good. Like it feels bad to be that stressed.
That's so interesting. Because when you say effective, because I think some people might say, well, I don't need to connect. I need to be effective. So that fact that you just tied both of those, right? It's connection and effectiveness. So someone listening because I think people who listen to podcasts usually are high achievers or wanting to grow and learn. And so there's people listening to you talk right now and saying, I want to be more successful. I want to do well or whatever. And so you tying that into, okay, this other feeling, this relaxed awareness can help in all aspects in the success and the connection piece. That's so interesting. And then thinking about the zebra, I think I'm going to print out a picture of a zebra, put it on my desk, be like the zebra. Because I have friends who work at big companies and have roles that are very demanding. And so I think it's so interesting to think about a zebra being chased by a lion and then being able to just relax, right? Like we can all be the zebra and that'll be helpful for us and that we can connect and we can be more effective. And I imagine there's probably a lot of physical, like for our body benefits too, right? Like being in this constant state of stress can't be good for us physically.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when you're in that state of stress, your adrenaline is flowing and your stress hormones, your cortisol is flowing. And Those things are useful when you're the zebra and the lion's chasing you because it activates your muscles and you're able to quickly get away. But to be in a chronic state of sort of adrenaline overload and cortisol overload, it's taxing on your body and your brain. It's definitely not good for you.
Yeah, the long-term effects are been noted, and I think there's increasing research on it in terms of the way that it impacts all of our systems. And I think maybe less tangible for people because we don't see it immediately. So it's harder, I think, to invest in what you can't see, but let it be known that those impacts are real.
Yeah, I know I have clients do like this little assessment on kind of our inner critic, what shows up for us, and a hyperachiever, it comes up a lot. And so I've had like a client in the past say, well, this is what makes me successful. And it is, right? But this feeling of stress, it's also can hurt us too, right? This chronic state of stress. I'm curious, what was something surprising that you both learned in the process of writing this book?
I think one of the things that was fun for me about the book and that was surprising was in my line of work, you can get really sort of hyper focused, narrowly focused on your area of expertise or research. And so this book was a really fun opportunity to kind of broaden out and see things from a wider and bigger perspective, which was great. And one thing that was surprising was, it's hard to describe, but how relational we are. And let me describe that a little bit. Like we talk about listening and understanding to other people and picking up on their emotional cues and resonating with them emotionally. But then we also talk about listening to ourselves and sensing our own feelings and our state of our own body, like Ashley talked about. And we came across some research that showed that there are some people who have more difficulty knowing what they're feeling. So they might have difficulty describing their own emotions. They might even have difficulty feeling their own bodies or feeling their feelings. Even if their heart is racing, they may not sense that as much. And those things are called like interoception, this ability to sort of feel inward and feel your own body. And interestingly, we came across some research that we included in the book that if you have difficulty knowing what you're feeling, how your body is, then you're going to have more difficulty sensing other people's feelings. And so it's going to affect your ability to connect with other people. So I just thought that was so interesting that if you can improve your own ability to kind of relax and attune into yourself, that can then have sort of carryover positive effects in your ability to connect to other people.
Yeah, it seems like it all starts with us learning about ourselves and how that interacts with the rest of the world too. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance because I can imagine some people listening might be, oh, what do you mean? Like all I'm doing is I'm in my head and I can't get out of it.
That's true.
Other people, might be the opposite, but it is this level of balance. And I think that's a big theme throughout the book of it's an ever moving dynamic between that focus and awareness of yourself and also the other person, but the two are tied together.
And just to emphasize that, if that's okay, I really like what Ashley brought up about balance, because I was thinking, Lupe, when you were talking about your clients saying like, well, that's what makes me successful, my drive and to some extent my stress. I was thinking, well, there's some truth to that. I mean, so I think it all comes down to balance, right? So it's like some degree of that drive and that go get 'em, go getter kind of attitude can really contribute to success, but it's also a matter of balance. It's like balancing that with an ability to regulate yourself and have times when you can relax so that you don't burn out and so that you can connect with others and be more effective.
That's awesome. Well, is there anything else related to your book that you'd like to share with listeners today?
One thing I'll add that I think is really important and a little surprising is that attunement can be really helpful for all types of connections. So not just intimate relationships, not just with people that you're closest to. It can be useful to develop for just casual interactions, brief interactions, and also for challenging conversations, for conversations where you might not agree with someone or you're having really heightened emotion in terms of conflict or negotiation, really trying to get a certain point of view across. And that's, I think, very applicable nowadays in terms of, we're constantly seeing polarizing interviews and opinions flying in lots of different spheres across the country and probably across a lot of different dinner tables as well. And so thinking about attunement and those skills, that relaxed awareness, that ability to listen with your whole body, It's a nice reminder for people that it makes you a more effective listener and communicator. And it also is probably going to have a reciprocal impact on the other person. It'll probably generate a level of reciprocity from them as well, which is surprising, especially when you're maybe arguing about something. I've had experiences recently where I've been talking to someone with a different point of view. And by using that relaxed awareness, I was able to notice myself getting agitated, getting really on the edge of my seat and anxious about wanting to get my point across and wanting them to feel the same way as me. Just noticing that, taking that breath, coming back to what I was feeling was a good reminder that probably that's going to make them shut down even faster than if I were to meet them where they are, hear their point of view, sort of work to find that common ground. It allows for a much more fruitful conversation. So, attunement really just is so varied in its applicability.
I might just add a word about the exercises in the book that Ashley mentioned, that we have these 4 pillars of attunement: relaxed awareness, listening, understanding, and mutual responsiveness. And we have a chapter on each of them. And at the end of each of those chapters, we have a list of different exercises that you can use to develop those. And I think what we meant for the book to be is flexible and able to be tailored to the individual. Like at the end of the book, we have an attunement quiz that you can take yourself, and it might help you to identify areas where you need a little more work in this area. Maybe you're really good at that area. So that'll help you to focus and say, well, maybe I should really focus my attention on these exercises from this chapter. And the other thing is, we list a lot of exercises. We don't necessarily expect that everyone's going to do all of them. That would be a large time commitment, but it's sort of like a menu of things for people to try out and see what they take to and see what they find helpful for themselves. So I just wanted to add that. And also, we have a website, missingeachother.com, and we have video examples and sort of guided instructions of how to carry out these exercises, because some of them are physical and might be hard to envision just from reading about it in the books. So you can check out our website and try them out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for writing this book. I think it's going to help a lot of people, and especially today when a lot of people are feeling disconnected. Where can people find your book? Where can people follow along? Where can people find you?
Well, they can start on the website, missingeachother.com. They can also follow our work. We've started to blog with Medium and Psychology Today. And so those are some fun avenues where we've been able to get really creative and just talk about ways where attunement is relevant to things that are happening in the world, topics that maybe we didn't get to cover in the book, or areas we wanted to talk about more. And so hopefully people can join us on that journey as well.
I'm not familiar with Medium. So you join and then you follow writers. Is that how it works?
Yeah, there's a lot of different bloggers on Medium.
Okay, so you can follow you and Ted and then get notifications to your writing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, we have an account called Missing Each Other Book, I think it's called, on Medium. And we're also on Instagram and we're on Facebook. So any of those ways.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you again. This is such a pleasure.
Thank you, Lupe. This was great.
Yeah.